They laughed the moment I stepped into the room, as if my presence alone was the punchline to a cruel joke. My mother's eyes slid past me like I was just another piece of furniture. "Sit in the corner, Mary," she whispered sharply. "Don't make a scene." My sister stood at the center of the room, glowing in her crisp uniform, fresh from basic training. She was their pride, their golden child, the shining soldier who could do no wrong. I was the failure, the invisible one, the daughter who never measured up. My name is Colonel Mary Halloran. I had walked through deserts, jungles, and war zones where silence could mean death, but nothing compared to the silence I carried in that house. At the family gathering, the air felt heavy, poisoned with judgment. I hadn't even taken my seat before the familiar chorus of insults began. My aunt leaned across the table and smirked. "So Mary, still playing soldier? Or did you finally give up on pretending?" Her voice carried enough sarcasm to slice through me. My uncle, who never served a day in his life, chuckled. "She's probably just cleaning boots somewhere." Meanwhile, her sister's actually making a name for herself. The words rolled off his tongue like he'd been waiting all year to deliver that line. I stayed quiet because what could I say? That I had commanded troops through missions he couldn't even imagine? That I had buried soldiers who gave everything while I carried the weight of their stories on my back? None of it would matter here. To them, I was still the daughter who disappointed. My sister, standing tall and smiling like a pageant queen, soaked in their praise. "She's so strong," my mother beamed, "so disciplined. Look at her posture, a real soldier." My father nodded with pride, his chest swelling as if her achievements were his own. And then his eyes flickered to me, cold, dismissive, unimpressed. "Mary," he said flatly, "you could learn a thing or two from her." That one cut deep. It wasn't just words, it was years. Years of being overlooked, years of service erased at the dinner table. Years of my blood and sweat, meaning less than my sister's fresh boots from training camp. I wanted to scream, to slam my hand on the table, to shout that I had earned my place in ways they couldn't begin to comprehend. But I didn't. I just sat there, quiet, with their voices swirling around me like a storm. Every laugh, every mocking glance, every offhand comment pressed down on my chest until breathing felt impossible. I was back in the same place I'd always been, an outsider in my own family. The humiliation wasn't new, but it cut just as sharply as the first time. Yet under the weight of their cruelty, I felt something shift. I wasn't that broken, silenced daughter anymore. I wasn't a failure. I was Colonel Mary Halloran. They could mock all they wanted, but the truth was waiting. And soon, it would speak louder than their laughter. Because respect has a way of finding its voice, even when family tries to bury it. I remember the first day I walked into the military academy. The air was thick with challenge, the kind that tests not just your body, but your very soul. They yelled at us until our ears rang, made us run until our legs gave out, and stripped us down to the raw edge of who we were. Most people would have quit. Most did. But I didn't. I stood tall, bruised and bleeding, but I refused to fall. That's how you rise. That's how you survive. I carried rifles heavier than my own body weight. I crawled through mud until it filled my teeth. I stood in freezing rain for hours while others begged for shelter, and somewhere in those trials, I stopped being just Mary. I became a leader. I learned what it meant to command, what it meant to look men in the eye and tell them to trust me with their lives. I didn't just wear the uniform, I became the weight of it. Through the years, I rose rank by rank, each step carved out of sweat and sacrifice. I remember the nights I couldn't sleep because the silence of the battlefield haunted me. I remember carrying the wounded, whispering promises to dying soldiers that their families would know they were heroes. I remember the faces of the ones who never came home. Their absence shaped me more than any medal on my chest ever could. And the medals did come, one after another, pinned against my heart, each one a story, a scar, a reminder that I had given more than most ever would. My peers respected me, my superiors trusted me. I earned the salute of men and women who understood the cost of leadership. Out there, in the world that truly mattered, I was someone. But at home? At home, none of it existed. My parents never once asked about my missions. They never cared to see the weight of the stars on my shoulders. My father never stood up at a gathering and said, "That's my daughter. She leads soldiers." My mother never bragged about my medals to her friends. My sister never asked me what it felt like to save lives in the middle of chaos. Not one of them cared. They didn't see me as Colonel Mary Halloran. They saw me as Mary, the mistake, the disappointment, the forgotten one. They treated my career like it was a silly hobby, something temporary, something meaningless. That betrayal cut deeper than any wound I ever took in uniform. A stranger could mock me, and I'd laugh it off. But when your own blood dismisses your sacrifice, that's a pain you never truly shake. So I stopped speaking. I stopped trying to prove myself at that table. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was armor. Every word they refused to hear, every sacrifice they refused to see, hardened inside me until it became strength. I didn't need their approval. I had already earned respect where it mattered most. I had already carved my name into history, with or without them. And one day, that silence, the silence they mistook for defeat, would be the very thing that exposed the truth. The evening dragged on like a cruel performance staged at my expense. My father beamed with pride as he raised his glass and announced, "Tonight, we have a special guest joining us, the man who's been training our star, my younger daughter, the drill sergeant himself." The room erupted in applause. My sister practically glowed, standing a little straighter, soaking in the admiration like sunlight. The sergeant nodded politely, shaking hands, his voice loud and confident as he praised her commitment, her promise, her potential. I sat at the far end of the table, invisible as always. Their laughter swirled around me, each joke a reminder of where I stood in their eyes. I didn't flinch. I had learned the art of silence, the kind that hides the fire burning beneath. I let them have their moment. My father laughed louder than anyone, drinking in the reflected glory of his perfect daughter. But then it happened. The sergeant's eyes drifted across the table, casual at first, and then his gaze landed on me. He froze. The expression on his face shifted instantly, draining of casual cheer, filling instead with something far heavier: shock, recognition, respect. He blinked once, twice, as if unsure of what he was seeing. Then he pushed back his chair slightly, almost instinctively, and straightened his posture. His voice, now lower and more deliberate, carried across the table like a strike of thunder. "General? Ma'am?" The air shattered. Forks clinked against plates. Glasses stilled in midair. My sister's smile faltered, dropping away as quickly as it had appeared. My father's hand froze around his drink. My mother's lips parted in confusion. The silence that fell over that table was nothing like the laughter that had filled it moments before. This silence was sharp, suffocating, undeniable. I looked back at the sergeant, calm, steady, unmoving. He nodded, his eyes filled with the kind of respect you cannot fake, the kind earned only through years of service, through battles survived, through leadership tested in fire. "Ma'am," he said again, his tone firm, his head inclining ever so slightly in deference. And there it was, the truth laid bare in front of them. The very man they had invited to glorify my sister now stood in awe of me. The uniform they had pretended not to see, the medals they had ignored, the years they had dismissed, all of it crashed into the open. My family had mocked me as their failure, their invisible daughter, but here, in front of them, stood proof they could not deny. No one spoke. My father's face darkened, pride collapsing into something smaller, meaner. My mother's hands fidgeted in her lap. My sister's eyes darted between the sergeant and me, her posture shrinking with each passing second. The laughter that had filled the room minutes ago had died a swift, ugly death. For once, I did not need to say a word. Their silence told me everything. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I let the silence sink in, heavy as a storm cloud pressing down on the table. The drill sergeant's words still lingered in the air. "General, ma'am," and I could feel every set of eyes burning into me. For years, I had begged for even a sliver of recognition from them. Tonight, it was handed to me without my asking, and it shook them harder than any speech I could ever give. The sergeant cleared his throat, but his gaze never left me. "Forgive me," he said, his voice steady now, tinged with awe. "I wasn't expecting to meet, well, her. Colonel Mary Halloran, one of the most respected officers I've ever read about. I heard stories, but I didn't think I'd ever see her outside of a military setting." He gave a small, respectful nod. "Your reputation precedes you, ma'am." The room froze tighter. My father's hand trembled slightly around his glass. My mother's lips quivered, pale and thin. My sister shifted in her seat, the glow of her earlier pride already fading like a candle snuffed out. The sergeant went on, unable to stop himself, his admiration genuine and unpolished. "I've told recruits about you, about the missions you led, about the impossible odds you turned into victories. You're a legend in your field, ma'am, the kind of officer young soldiers dream of becoming. Your leadership has saved lives, more than most of us will ever truly understand." The weight of his words pressed harder than any insult I'd ever endured at this table. My family had mocked me for years, calling me nothing, dismissing my service, ridiculing my sacrifices. And yet here was a man they admired, their honored guest speaking truths they could never deny. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was more powerful than any defense I could have made. I looked across the table. My father's jaw tightened, his pride collapsing under the weight of reality. My mother couldn't meet my eyes. She stared down at her plate as though it could swallow her whole. My sister, once glowing under the drill sergeant's praise, sat stiff and pale, her confidence unraveling thread by thread. No one dared to laugh now. No one dared to speak. The silence told the story better than I ever could. For once, they couldn't twist the truth. They couldn't reshape it to fit their narrative of me as the failure, the disappointment, the invisible daughter. The truth stood in front of them, undeniable and raw. I was Colonel Mary Halloran. I was not their mistake. I was their shame for not seeing me sooner. I leaned back slightly in my chair, calm, collected, steady. I didn't need revenge in the form of anger. Their faces, shaken, ashamed, crumbling under the weight of recognition, were revenge enough. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small at that table. I felt untouchable. I stood slowly, the chair sliding back with a sound that seemed to echo louder than all their laughter from earlier in the night. No words left my lips. None were needed. I smoothed the front of my uniform with a steady hand, every medal and ribbon catching the dim light of the chandelier above, forcing them to see what they had always chosen to ignore. The silence was unbearable for them, but for me, it was peace. I let my eyes sweep across the table one last time. My father, who had spent years parading my sister as his pride, sat rigid, his face pale and hollow. My mother's head hung low, her eyes refusing to meet mine, shame etched deep into the corners of her mouth. My sister, once glowing, once triumphant, looked shattered, her pride cracked and crumbling under the weight of the truth. Even the drill sergeant who had praised her now sat respectfully quiet, his gaze lowered, as if standing witness to something greater. I didn't say a word, because silence can be sharper than any speech, heavier than any confrontation. With measured steps, I turned from the table and walked away. Each stride carried years of rejection, betrayal, and pain, and shed them behind me like an old skin. My revenge wasn't in screaming or proving them wrong. It was in rising above their blindness. It was in being seen by the world where it mattered, by soldiers who saluted me, by leaders who trusted me, by strangers who knew my name carried weight. I opened the front door, the night air cool against my face, and stepped outside. For the first time in a long time, I breathed freely. Out here, away from their narrow table and their smaller world, I wasn't their invisible daughter anymore. I wasn't their failure. I was Colonel Mary Halloran, respected, saluted, known. Behind me, the house sat in suffocating silence, its walls forever carrying the memory of this night. They would never forget it. No amount of excuses, no twisting of words, no cruel laughter could erase the moment they were forced to see me as I truly was. That was my closure. That was my justice. As I walked further into the night, I realized the truth that had taken me years to learn. My worth had never been theirs to give, and it could never be theirs to take away. Their acceptance wasn't a prize. Their rejection wasn't a curse. I had built myself on something stronger: honor, service, sacrifice, and strength. I wasn't leaving defeated. I was leaving free. And for the first time, I felt untouchable. Not because they finally saw me, but because I had finally stopped needing them to.